afternoon once again to everybody. Welcome to the last part of our conference, which is on Intervene, a seminar called Christianity in Africa, the Beginnings, Failures, Glories, and Potentials. Let us begin by putting this into context. Before Christianity in Africa, what was the situation like? As you can see, before Christianity came to Africa, there were religious ideas which grew from a belief in magical powers of objects to a magical powers of animals, such as the hawk, the jackal, the snake, and the crocodile, and eventually to a faith in gods with animal heads and human beings mainly representing those gods. So that was how the situation was like before Christianity came to Africa. Now, what was the beginning of Christianity in Africa? After the death of Christ, the Jewish practitioners of Christianity spread the faith in such a rapid manner in the 2nd century, mainly into the Greek-speaking commercial centers through the Mediterranean world. Alexandria in Egypt, as you can see, became the largest single community of Jews outside of Israel. According to Eusebius, in the 4th century, the gospel writer Mark traveled to Alexandria in approximately 60 AD, helping to found the church in Alexandria. So this is the earliest record of how Christianity was introduced into Africa by the gospel writer Mark in the Bible, who was definitely one of Christ's disciples. So, flowing from there, many developments showed up in the Christian church in Africa. One of the foremost was the practice of monk lifestyle of worship. Now, how did it start? It said an alternative Christian practice emerged in Egypt at that time, with some of them adopting a more austere and self-denying lifestyle. A key figure among them was Anthony. Anthony was an Egyptian hermit who, upon hearing the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 19, verse 21, which says, and Jesus said unto him, If thou wilt be perfect, go and sell that thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. Upon hearing this gospel preached to him, Anthony decided to go sell his property and to begin a life of fasting and prayer. Discovering, according to Athanasius, who was the bishop in Alexandria at that time, who noted this, that to Anthony, the mind of the soul is strong when the pleasures of the body are weak. Anthony, after 15 years of austerity, resolved to shun contact with people. So in the first 15 years, he just, tried to stay away from having one thing or the other. But he actually decided now, after 15 years of this lifestyle, to stay away with contact with people and to spend the next 20 years in an abandoned Roman fort in Egypt. Seeing no one, surviving on bread and water, passed to him through a crevice in the wall, assailed by demons in the form of wild beasts, snakes, scorpions, and seductive women, or a seductive woman, which was noted, but overcoming them with the power of prayer. He died in the year 356, having lived for 105 years. Anthony became one of the foremost practitioners of monk lifestyle in Africa. He was followed by the likes of Pachomius and many others, as we see today. So this is actually the history of monk in Africa. Now, the empire, I would say, when Christianity spread farther into the northwest Africa, or the northwestern part of Africa, beyond Alexandria, some of the Roman authorities at that time began to see themselves more as the custodians of the faith of Christ. They deemed the phenomenon of Christianity spreading to constitute even a threat to their own authority, even annoyed at some Christians who would not swear allegiance to them, because now they are believing in God directly, not through them, kind of. This grave, self-centered approach to Christianity gave rise to persecutions and to Christian martyrdom. It is said of some Christian men, about 7 of them and 5 women, from the inland town of Scilly in Carthage in the year 180, that when they were accosted by the Roman Empire, this is the response they gave. In response, they said, "The empire of this world I do not recognize, but rather I serve that God whom no man has seen, nor can see with human eyes." And these kind of speeches ended them in deep trouble. There is this story of the great but very tragic case told of Vibia Perpetua, who was facing death in Carthage in the year 203. Perpetua was a noble woman around the age of 22 years, well educated, but she had to defy her own father and abandon her own infant son for the sake of her Christian faith. When asked by the governor Hilarianus to have pity on her own father's gray hair and on her infant baby by renouncing her Christianity, Perpetua refused and declared, "I am a Christian." In her diary, she noted, and I quote, "We were condemned to the beasts and returned to the amphitheater. We were condemned to the beasts and returned to the prison in high spirits." They were subsequently marched from prison to the amphitheater as if they were on their way to heaven, trembling with joy. Then they were devoured by a leopard, a bear, and a boar, and wild heifer, before being finished off by the sword of a gladiator. If you have been to Rome, you see the remains of the amphitheater, or the most recent version of the amphitheater there. Tertullian, who is said to have witnessed the events remarked, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. So, very early on, Christianity in Africa faced grave challenge. And many people have paid great prices in the past till we see Christianity today as it is. All these were not enough until a new round of persecutions in the year 303, which was dubbed the Great Persecution, led to fierce controversy and a lasting split in the Christian community. Emperor Diocletian ordered the arrest of all bishops and priests, and rather than face martyrdom, most senior clergy decided to comply and surrendered their scriptures. But the zealots, or the zealot Christians, were infuriated by these compromises. Prices have been paid and paid and paid. This split continued, and in the year 3112, both factions elected their own candidates for Bishop of Carthage. The Zealots elected Donatus, which soon formed the Donastics Church, with the established church outside the Donastics gaining support from the Roman authorities in the Catholic Church. Christians continued to fight Christians, seeking to surpass the other. No focus on God, but on their own physical church and themselves. What was the impact of this grave disagreements and persecutions that led to a split? The Romans had been forced after this time to Mauritania by the end of the 3rd century, and were also kicked out of Carthage and Hippo by the Vandals in the year 429. It was all too easy for the church to be driven out of most of northern Africa. So it is not just Islam which came to overtake Christianity in northern Africa, but division and self-centeredness and persecution had already taken its toll in Africa, in the Christian world at that time. But this was not the end. Time passed by, and doctrinal differences also now showed up even the more. Mainly over what? Over how the church should distinguish between the human Christ and from the divine Christ. This led to a massive crisis in the church in Egypt, where at that time they were actually moving from strength to strength, and at that time could record about 90% of all Coptic speaking Egyptians as Christians. Underneath the doctrinal differences was a struggle for power and influence between the bishops of Alexandria, Constantinople, Rome, and Jerusalem. Hence, the bishops took sides, not based on any spiritually inclined positions, but to favor a certain viewpoint of some of the people in order to gain influence. Many Christians from time since memorial have not focused on the core mission of Christ. And that is one of the reasons why a lot of challenges has come out from Christianity, and even for that matter, religion in general. Such struggle for power and leadership continued until Alexandria became the seat of two patriarchs in a formal schism. One patriarch was appointed by Melkite or the Greek Church, and the other also chosen by the Coptic Orthodox Church, who obtained loyalty of most Egyptians and went on to have a remarkable influence on Christianity in the interior of Africa. In the year 316, a great and positive story came about in Africa in the history of Christianity. But it started on a bad note. In year 316, Frumentius and his brother Edesius, who were Christians in their youth, were captured along the Red Sea and taken up into the kingdom of Aksum as slaves. These brothers managed to gain the trust of the king, who set them free shortly before before his own death, I should say, the king's death. But the widowed queen convinced them to stay in Aksum to train their son Azana until he assumed the throne. Izana became a king in the year 330, and the brothers departed from Aksum with Edesius traveling on to their hometown Tyre, and Frumentius approaching Bishop Athanasius in Alexandria. So the brothers took different paths after their release. And when Frumentius went to Alexandria, he appealed to Alexandria to send a Christian mission to Aksum. He was mindful of what the power of Christianity could do in the land. So he was quick to advocate for it. Now, Athanasius duly chose Frumentius himself, in this case, as the suitable candidate and consecrated him as a bishop. Therefore, Frumentius returned to Aksum, established an episcopal see there, and converted many people to Christianity, including Izana, the king at that time. Frumentius was the first of 111 Egyptian monks to take up that post for the next 1,600 years until the 1950s in the highland region of Abyssinia, which later became Ethiopia. An interesting situation was that at the time of Frumentius as bishop in Aksum, Aksum was at the height of its power and prosperity, same as was the case when Joseph was in leadership in Egypt. Showing forth that the virtues of Christ in us speaks loud everywhere if we dare take it seriously. It saves from calamity and enables God to use us to do strange and lasting works like he did with Joseph, he did with Frumentius, who in effect was like a Joseph for whom many of us Africans have come to hear the word of God today. Now, the Europeans came to Africa. Sorry. The Europeans came to Africa. The Portuguese among the very first, invading Africa, but they saw two main goals. One, to locate and obtain the gold of the land of Ophir, and to fend off the spreading of Islam. Not necessarily to promote Christianity, but to fend off the spreading of Islam. Yeah, two totally different visions. The British also, in the year 1841, in one of their expeditions into Africa, which was named Bibles and Plough, they intended to spread Christianity, but commerce as well, especially in West Africa. When the Portuguese came to the Congo, and after some difficult moments in getting the people and their king, Mani Congo, to accept them, they struck an amicable relationship with the Mani Congo, who was the king. The king of Portugal, King João, saw an opportunity to establish a Christian state in Black Africa under the protectorate of Portugal. In the year 1900, a full-scale delegation was dispatched from Lisbon, which included a dozen priests, and this is where the intention of the people is absolutely clear. So they brought a dozen priests, some soldiers, some masons, carpenters, printers, and farmers, and women skilled at baking bread and sewing. So they came fully prepared. But there was absolutely no focus on Christianity or the spreading of Christianity. And therefore, there was very, very little impact of Christianity in Africa, even at that time with the early Europeans coming to Africa. After being baptized as King João I in Ginza, who is the Mani Congo, later abandoned the faith and sent the Portuguese away because of their requirements to drop many of their traditional beliefs and practices, including polygamy and doing away with the fetish idols. But his son, Afonso, however, remained an ardent convert, and in the year 1506 renewed links with Lisbon and obtained support to establish Congo as a Christian state. Again, under King Afonso I, the kingdom triumphed. Even new plants were introduced in Congo at that time, including maize and sugarcane. And Mbanza in Ginza, who became Afonso Afonso I in his capital Mbanza was then transformed into a city of stone building. His reign, however, suffered decline because of slavery. Slave trade became more prevalent in the land. Afonso the king, who himself owned slaves, appealed to the Portuguese to stop buying slaves. In a very telling letter he wrote to the king of Portugal at that time, Afonso wrote saying, "In this kingdom, faith is as fragile as glass because of the bad examples of the men who come to teach here. Because the lust of the world and the lure of wealth turn away from the truth. But just as the Jews crucified the Son of God because of covetousness, my brother, so today he is again crucified. These appeals of the king of Congo, Afonso, at that time, who had been converted Christian, fell on deaf ears as King Joao III responded, saying that his people tell him that the land is so vast that it's as if slavery never occurred. It is noted that about 10 of Afonso's own people, nephews, grandsons, and others, were taken slaves and sent to Brazil around this time. Unfortunately, these kind of cankers still remain in the Christian faith today, crucifying Christ again and again. Bad examples in so many areas, which we must watch. Now, during the late 1700 and early 1800, the campaign in Britain to abolish the slave trade gathered momentum, primarily because of Christian evangelism and activists. One such great example is William Wilberforce, a British who led a coalition of abolitionists, stressed both ethical and pragmatic arguments to make their point. They, being propelled by the evangelical fervor, emphasized the evils of trade or slave trade. Following this, London passed a bill in the year 1807, making it illegal for British merchants to participate in the slave trade. The US followed in 1808 to make slave trade illegal. Christianity or Christian missionaries were sent to Sierra Leone, not just to spread the Christian message among the recaptures, or among the population, but to establish schools for them, teach them English and practical skills, and to administer their villages on behalf of the governments. From this came the first English educated elite in West Africa. In the year 1827, a Yoruba man named Samuel Ajayi Crowther, who became one of the first to enroll, had been captured actually earlier by Muslim raiders at the age of 13. He was then sold to the Portuguese traders, put on board a transatlantic slave ship, rescued by the British Naval Patrol, and released into the care of Christian missionaries in Freetown. Samuel Ajayi was one who first translated the Bible into the local dialect in Abeokuta, in Nigeria today. The London Missionary Society then sent the young Scottish missionary Robert Moffat to set up a missionary station among the Tilhapin at Kuruman on the fringe of the Kalahari Desert. Moffat was also the first to translate the Swanee language into written format and the Bible into Setswana, and Kuruman also became a base of exploration and center of learning. There is also David Livingstone, who tutored under Moffat and married his daughter. David, arrived in Zanzibar in January 1866, saw his mission not merely to solve the mystery of the Nile source, but to expose the true scale of slavery in the interior. This open soul of the world, as termed by David Livingstone, David took account of evil acts meted out against people, including a massacre at Inyangwe against the African residents intended to terrify the local population into submission in July 1871. His works was carried to London, which generated public outcry, resulting in the British government deciding to enforce the abolition of the abolition of the sale of all slaves. So it wasn't enough for the law to be passed then. Christian missionaries had to actively engage for its enforcement. This further forced the Sultan Bagash at that time to sign a treaty on 5th June 1873, agreeing to shut down all slave markets and to prohibit seaborne traffic in slaves. Sultan Bagash, the Sultan of Zanzibar at that time, actually ensured that the slave market in Zanzibar was closed that day. I mean, even the whole market actually. And this was a very big decision because the people revolted gravely against the Sultan. But he eventually had no choice because of the work of David Livingstone, the evangelist, and which had come through from London. So individuals have focused on Christ and have made invaluable impacts in the past. There is also in Uganda the first Christian missionaries who arrived in Buganda in 1877. London's Church Missionary Society, led by Alexander Marquis. Soon after, the French Catholics also arrived, led by Charles Lavigere. These two groups, unfortunately, the British and the French missionaries, competed about which of them is true religion or true Christianity. And therefore, in Uganda at that time, they made no impact. But the people of Ethiopia or Abyssinia at that time held their belief in God. And when put to the test, Abyssinia always referred to God. For instance, in March 1895, the Emperor Menelik had a disagreement with Italy, which spanned across the Mareb River border. When Italy's General Oristo Baratieri advanced into Tigray, Menelik responded to the battle with the Italian army and the invasion, saying, "Assemble the army, beat the drum. God in his bounty has struck down my enemies and enlarged and preserved me to today. Enemies have come, would raid our country and change our religion. They have passed beyond the sea which God gave us our frontier. These enemies have advanced, burrowing into the country like moles. With God's help, I will get rid of them." I mean, if you understand the history of world powers, there should be no question about a battle between Italy and Ethiopia, especially those days. But this was the result of the battle at that time, in March 1895. The Italians, who had 8,500 men or man army, plus 7,100 Eritrean auxiliaries, at the end of the battle, had 4,100 Italians dead or missing, about 2,000 captured, and 4,000 Eritrean auxiliaries killed or captured. While Menelik's casualties were equally high, the Italians publicly renounced their claim to a protectorate and recognized Abyssinia as an independent sovereign state. Abyssinia or Ethiopia remains one foremost country in Africa which was never colonized. Ever. From the days of Menelik till tomorrow. There's talk about Liberia, where they put slaves there, but Abyssinia or Ethiopia was there as a nation. The people were defended by God since. Menelik allowed the Italians to maintain Eritrea. Other European states also recognized Abyssinia's independence, and at the end of the scramble for Africa, as I've said, Abyssinia was the only African state in the entire continent to have achieved this status. So, belief in God or Christianity has its serious, significant impact on the land of Africa. Now, on the other side, many have tried to use Christianity to justify many acts. Paul Kruger, who was an ardent believer in the Word of God at the time, he became the leader of the Transvaal community in Pretoria, South Africa, was approached by Cecil Rhodes from the Cape. Cecil Rhodes was the famous rich man from the mines of South Africa, whose name was given after even Zambia and Zimbabwe, northern Rhodesia at that time, the name were given. So Rhodes, a man of great power and wealth, at the height of his money and power, he sought to take over the land in the south of Africa for British rule or Britain rule. In one conversation with Kruger, and Kruger was actually a Dutch, because the Dutch had previously been there on the land, and they were a bit up in the Pretoria area, and the British had taken over the more southern, the Cape area. But Cecil Rhodes and his people wanted total dominion of the entire southern area of Africa. So this is part of his agenda. He went to Kruger in November 1890, and in one of their conversations, he asked Kruger to join him to take over the Delagua Bay, which is the coast of Mozambique, from the Portuguese. But Kruger, whom I've said was an ardent believer in God, a Christian, responded saying, "How can we work that way?" Because Cecil said, "Let's work together." He said, "How can we work together that way? The port belongs to the Portuguese, and they will never give it up." Rhodes responded, he says, "We must simply take it." But Kruger responded saying, "I can't take it. I can't take the property of other people. A curse rests upon ill-gotten goods." Such was how ardent Kruger was, and such was how deceitful Rhodes was. Eventually, Rhodes set out to remove Kruger. He created a battle from nowhere to overtake him, and that battle led by Chamberlain in 1899 was said of the London newspapers that this was going to be a tea time war, that in no time it will be over, easy. But that battle saw the costliest, bloodiest, and most humiliating war that Britain had waged in nearly a century. In Rhodesia, on the other side, go back. In Rhodesia, on the other side, Ian Smith, the white man you see there, front leader at that time, saw no reason to make such concessions to the black people seeking their freedom and independence. He ordered the detention of leading nationalists like Zappos Joshua Nkomo, two of them together here, and ZANU's Robert Mugabe, and hundreds of other activists. In pursuit of white supremacy, Smith had set Rhodesia on a perilous course and even declared, "We have struck a blow for the preservation of justice, civilization, and Christianity." Can you imagine? Having oppressed the people, he justified it by saying that it was good for the preservation of Christianity. But that is not Christianity. At the time that Nelson Mandela was 30 years old, Jan Smuts, the Prime Minister of South Africa in the year 1948, Mandela was born in the year 1918. Jan Smuts led the development of a manifesto in that year, few months before the general elections in South Africa, in which his national party promised the segregation of black population wherever possible. They said, by such means, no race group would then threaten the future of any other group. Also, they asserted that all this would be in Christian principles of right and justice. The leader of the National Party, Daniel Malan, won the election narrowly, after which he said, "Today, South Africa belongs to us once more. For the first time since union, South Africa is our own, and may God grant that it will always remain our own." But today, we know South Africa is not as Daniel Malan, as Cecil Rhodes, Jan Smuts, and the likes have sought it, because they deceitfully use biblical principles for their selfish gains, and such acts have always fallen apart and will continue to do so, even in our time and in the times to come. Now, by 1910, 16,000 European missionaries were stationed in Africa. Years of work were devoted to translating the Bible, primary prayers, and hymns into vernacular languages and transcribing oral languages into written form for the first time. By 1914, there was an estimated 7 million Christians in Africa. And as you can see on the screen, this estimated 7 million was virtually approximately 8% of the population. Excuse me. Please come. Excuse me. So by 1914, about only 8% of the population of Africa had managed to be Christians, since only 60 years after the death of Christ. Only only 60 years after the death of Christ, the immediate partners that partnered with Christ were in Africa to evangelize. But almost, at least 19,900 years later on, not much had happened, because men will not avail themselves to true Christian living. And we can see on the screen that around 1900s, only 1.4% of the population, for instance, in Congo, in Zaire, as it became, were all Christians. But by the 2000s, it has become 95.4%. Angola, less than 1%, but in recent years, 94%. We can see that Zimbabwe, Kenya, they all had barely any semblance of Christianity in the society. But today, they count around 80%, same as Malawi. This shift in the society in Africa happened in a space of 100 years or even less. So we must understand what has accounted for this. It's because some few men and women set off to do the work of Christ. He said, go to the ends of the world and proclaim the gospel. He says, everywhere you go, they receive you. Bless them. He says, if you have 2 jackets and your brother asks you for one, give it out. They devoted themselves. For instance, somebody like David Livingstone actually died in the hinterlands of Africa before the slave trade was enforced, leaving all that he had. We talked about Vibia Perpetua. We talked about Frementius. We talked about Samuel Ajayi Crowther. Ajayi could have gone home, having been rescued and saved and become part of the British society. But they all labored one by one, by one, by one, and through that, Christianity spread like fire in a short time, and many of these actually have taken place since only the last 80 or 70 years or so. Let's take these statistics one step further. We see that Christianity is really a mainstay in Africa now, because nations like Seychelles, like the Cape Verde, Congo, Brazzaville, Namibia, Lesotho, Burundi, Gabon have over 90% of the population as Christians. We also have nations like Uganda, Rwanda, Equatorial Guinea, South Africa, accounting for at least 75% or more of the population as Christians. Even nations like Ghana, Ethiopia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Central African Republic have well over 50% of the population as Christians. Other nations like Cameroon, Eritrea, Tanzania also account for at least between 50 and 55%. And then Madagascar, Nigeria, Togo also something above 40%. And the statistics continue like that. We see that Christianity is now a mainstay in Africa. So Christians have a great expectation to seek the advancement of their nations or of the continent, wherever we are. Because it is said that to whom much is given, much is expected. So if the land will not be restored, it will be because Christians failed Africa. If Africa will remain as it is, it will mean because those who claim to believe in Christ have not indeed been the salt of the world and the light of the world. For we cannot light a candle and put it under the table. We cannot be the salt of the world and not have a taste in the land. So it is a call for all Christians to arise and to intervene and to seek the advancement of their nations in every endeavor whichsoever they can. Now let's consider the times and seasons of our lifetime, because we seek the advancement of Africa in our lifetime. So we must understand what is ahead and which times we are in. This is a list of a research done by some people showing a list of countries with the top 10 largest Christian population by 2060. So, which is about 40 years from now, 41 years or so from now. And that is our lifetime. So this is the kind of situation we are faced with in the near future. You will see that currently the countries that are estimated to have the largest number of Christian population will be United States, followed by Brazil, but among it is Nigeria the third, and DR Congo with 160 million people holding the Christian faith or calling themselves as Christians. Number 7 on this list is also African, which is Tanzania, 117 million people. Number 8 is also Africa, which is Uganda, 96.2 million people. Number 9 on this list is also projected to be African, Kenya, which is 91.7 million people. Number 10 on the list is also projected to be African, Ethiopia, with 87.6 million people accounting themselves as Christians. So among the 10, 6 of those nations will be in Africa, of the highest or the largest Christian populations in the world. Africa will be at the center of Christianity in our lifetime. What are we doing about it? How are we channeling this to restore the land? Now, Nigeria is a special case. Nigeria, by the year 2060, will be the only nation in the world that will be on the list of the top 10 largest populations for both Christians and Muslims. Nigeria is projected to be the 3rd largest Christian nation in the world and the 3rd largest Muslim nation in the world. Nigeria will be at the epicenter of 2 strong beliefs and therefore will be the center of great attention. But we know that Christians are the light of the world. A city set on a hill that cannot be hid. The Bible says that he that is above all. But we also know that by their fruits we will know them. So Christians, especially in Nigeria and in Africa, will have to demonstrate the virtues of Christ. He says the fruit of the Spirit include what? Love, peace, long-suffering, patience, faith. We will have the odious responsibility of showing these virtues to ensure that the nations are preserved, they live in peace, we produce the right kind of leadership, and we seek the advancement of the nations of the world, of Africa. Based on these facts, our mission is central to the chances of Africa's restoration in our lifetime. As we wrap up, let us understand again that Africa will lead Christianity for the world, but what story will be written thereafter? We have listened to the stories of those who persecuted others, interpreting the faith to suit their comfort. We have seen how misplaced priorities brought little and no impact. The question remains, will Christ be proud of the children of God in Africa today and in the days and the years to come? Each of us must reflect critically on this point. Let us understand that the chart we saw there, with all the nations of Africa having the largest population of Africa and all that, is not automatic. It's not automatic. Why? Because in the days of Mark, Anthony, and the likes in Egypt, Christianity reigned supreme. But it virtually was extinguished. So it is not automatic. It is not automatic that these numbers will be seen by the year 2060. If we don't do anything about it. And it is also important to acknowledge that it is not about numbers. Even God himself told Joshua to reduce the armies and go with only quality people. If we only count as the number of Christians in Africa and feel proud about it, then we have missed it. Then we have missed it. We need an army that goes on their knees and pray for the land. An army that are resolved to live like Frementus did, like Perpetua did, ready to be slaughtered for Christ. Even today, many are shy to show themselves forth as Christians. But today is a call unto every Christian anywhere in this world, even especially in Africa, that if you will not be shy of God and own up as a true child of God, which is very fine and very okay, you stand a risk of slipping by. Do your work colleagues know you are Christian? Do your family accept that you are a child of God? I mean, a true one as such? Does our fruit show? It is written in the book of Joel that in those days shall the Lord raise his army, who will run through the troops. They will skip walls. They shall run each of them in their ranks, and they shall not break their ranks. So, be part of this army, deliberate and so. Reverse missionary to the world is our duty, and to do the work that David Livingstone, Moffat, and the likes did in Africa. The missionaries who stepped in and stopped their own people from slave trade. It is our turn to show forth good fruit wherever we are, especially some of us who are outside of the continent of Africa. It must be said that indeed these people have brought a positive impact into our land. The greatest potential is to live the true Christian values thereof. By their fruit you shall know them. Even Africans find it difficult to love other Africans. Would prefer to engage with a foreigner than a fellow African. This is an individual work and not a group work. God rewards his children individually. So this is a call on the African Christian to take up a decisive step to be a candidate for restoration for the land of Africa. A conviction of heart, a deliberate decision, backed by commitment of actions, including prayers, will see a new breed of Christ-centeredness, centered men and women seeing and touching the glory of God coming forth on Africa and to Africa in our lifetime. We will see Africa restored in our lifetime if we make this restoration our life duty, without which we will also pass through and there will be no impact. But we know that by the acts of God in our midst this time, by that year 2060, when Africa is fully in charge, we will truly be showing forth a new kind of experience, a different kind of report that has been reported in the past of Christians. People will no more have justification to say religion in general, or better still, Christianity is part of the reasons why we are suffering. We will show forth a good and a better report. I want to round up with this message. In our time, we will not fail. In our time, as children of God here in this world, we will serve God faithfully and will commit to the restoration of Africa. Thank you very much.